Hello everyone, my name's Kate Cooper. I'm Head of Research, Policy and Standards at the Institute of Leadership and Management, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Being Your Best Self Online. And I think that's something that's probably been testing a lot of us over the last few months. Some details about how to get the most from the webinar. Please do check your audio, see if you need to dial in instead of using your computer, and also how to answer questions by using the chat box. We have a handout which has all that useful information for you, and also in that handout is information about today's guest presenter, Emma Serlin. So welcome, Emma, and thank you very much for joining us today. A webinar I've really been looking forward to, and no doubt so have the many people that have registered.
Great. Well,
I've just got to talk a little bit more about our dimensions of leadership, because everybody loves to hear about those. So the Institute of Leadership and Management recognises leadership as being multidimensional, and the dimension that we'll be really looking at today, that part of leadership that's about taking responsibility, about owning various aspects of your work, and importantly, and that's really when I'm going to invite Emma to talk to us now, thinking about our personal brand, but of course not exclusively. So please do ask Emma questions, leave your comments during the course of the webinar, and we'll deal with those at the end. So thank you all, and thank you very much, Emma, and sorry for having to persevere with my dimensions of leadership. Over to you now.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and it's really lovely to be here today. So firstly, I'll just tell you a little bit about me. I am Emma Serlin, and I run and am the founder of London Speech Workshop, and we are a communication coaching and training company, and we've been going for 12 years. And I have also written a couple of books on the art of communication, and also we have a method that I've developed which our coaches deliver, and some of the gems of this method are what I'm delighted to be sharing with you today. And obviously, as this strange time that we've arrived at has sort of flowered before us, and we've started to realize how it's going to impact us, moving everything online, we've tailored and tweaked bits of our method and added bits to really be most helpful to our clients. So I'm really hoping you're going to get lots out of today. There's time at the end for questions, and the more tricky, the better. So really don't hold back on asking your questions, and I hope that I will be able to help and support. So I'm going to be sharing my screen, but I would like to say, as this is all about communication and conversation, it's really, really important to be connecting. And I had a big personal debate whether I was going to give you some slides. It's always nice to see some slides, but I think the most important thing is to be connecting in these online conversations. So I'll do a bit of slides, and then hopefully you're having me big and the slides on the side. But that is the most important connection we can make. So the first thing, and I'll show my screen now. Whilst putting it up, give me 2 seconds, because sometimes it's not been playable. There we go. So getting the most out of these online conversations. So the first thing is that people really need to feel important in these conversations. And I think one thing that we can forget when we're in the virtual space, particularly when there's lots of people, is kind of the art of it, the importance of things like small talk and rapport building and making people feel good. And so with that in mind, I actually want to start with a couple of questions for you, just to bring you into the room, because it's so important that everyone you're speaking to, if you're delivering a presentation or if you're listening to it, it's so important that everyone feels important, like they matter. And that's what we've got to be mindful of, even more so in this virtual context. So my first question for you, just to get you into this space, is how are you feeling today? I think there's a score. So 5 is wonderful. Oh, sorry, 1 is wonderful, and 5 is I've had better days, not so great, and then we've got somewhere in between. So if you just let me know about that. And while you're filling that in, I'll just mention around the second one. So as we've all moved online, there's a real there's a real pressure to suddenly perform in the virtual medium. And actually, it's the unknown. And so it's really important for us to understand what is actually involved with performing in the virtual medium. Like, what does that entail? So that just brings me to my second question. I don't know if we've got answers to the first question.
Just going to give you answers to the first question, Emma. So we had 40% who said 3, 38% who said 2, 11% said 4. We had 8% who said 1, and 2% who said 5.
Okay, so that's really interesting to see that graph. So I think I imagine that some of that, we've got a lot of people around the 3 mark, and we just had a meeting with our team of coaches as well. And in fact, can you see me? I hope you can all see me. But with our team of coaches, a lot of people are feeling a bit meh is the word of the day. And I think that being understanding of ourselves about how this interesting and new context can affect us is really important. So first tip is, if you're doing a presentation or you've got a team meeting, start with that bit of rapport building. Ask how people are. And thank you all for those of you who participated. Second quick question is, how are you all feeling about moving into the online realm? So about so much of your life being transferred to online, so much of your working life. And again, 1 is, I love it. It's just great. I've always wanted this to happen. And 5 is, finding it really difficult to connect with people via Zoom. So just fill that in, if you will. Just give you a second for that. While you're filling that in, I don't know how long it takes, so I'll just give you a second. But while you're filling that in, I'll just share with you, I'm going to cover 3 particular areas. There's obviously so much we could cover in terms of how to get the most out of online conversations. But I'm looking at 3 areas that I think will be most useful. The first is making a great impression and some tips around that. The second is listening and connecting, which is really important. And the third is something about what you say and how you say it. So before we launch into that, let's just see if we've got some results from our second poll.
We have 38% who said 3. We have 27 2. We have 21 4, 9 1, and 5 5 actually. I'm going to hide that poll. Emma, we just need to share your slides again. We can't see your slides. We can see you perfectly though.
Good. Okay, let me do this. Okay, there we go. So here we are. So those are the 3 things we're going to cover. We've talked about that. And now let's begin. So making a great first impression online. Now, the first thing is that you need to curate your square. So we've all got this square, and that's what we're working with. It's very different from being in a conference hall or being in a meeting around a table where there's all of us. Now we have a square. So it's really important that we curate it. That square is totally linked to our personal brand. And it's something for you all to be conscious of, because this is conversations, and conversations are 2-way things. It's really important, if you can, that you're turning your video on. And that means your square is going to be seen. So if, for example, you're going for a job interview or it's anything in a work context, you want your square to represent you. It might be that that's colourful, it might be that that's precise, it might be that it's creative. But whatever it is, make sure that the message your square is giving out is consistent with the message you want it to give out. And I can't tell you how many people I've spoken. We've been doing lots of interviews over the last few months because we've been doing quite a bit of hiring. And so many people haven't curated their square. And when they do, I always comment on it. It's the first thing I say for my bit of rapport building and small talk. I compliment them on their square. But it's a beautiful sort of empowering space that you can curate. So be your own curator. That's your first big tip. Secondly, make an effort. So it seems really obvious, but if someone has got sort of mess in the background, is wearing an old t-shirt, looks a bit rubbish, it makes a statement. And we're sort of set up as humans, as interacting communicators, to read and make shorthand, so heuristics, where we just go, right, I'll just get that impression, I'll read that first bit of data, and I'll decide what I think about you based on that. It's not that you can't change any of those impressions that are made in that first instant, but it's like giving yourself harder work. So set yourself up for success, and that means making sure that you look the part. I interviewed someone and she was wearing a baggy jumper for a formal office job, and it was like she hadn't bothered. So it's really, really important to just be mindful. Thirdly, check your connection. It's really obvious, but I've definitely, even though I know this stuff, fallen down a few times. If you might know Zoom, but they're using Microsoft Teams, check it first beforehand so you can come on, you know how to use whatever medium or platform they're using or you're doing the meeting on. So there's no kind of uncomfortable moments before you get to it. So you know what you're dealing with. Like for this, I knew that there's a glitch in my screen, so that I have to do a little bit of irritating movement, but it hasn't thrown me because I knew that beforehand. So it's that kind of prep that will help. Next, and it's a little point, but don't talk from a hill. So many of us will speak into our phone or be quite high up on our desk and our laptops down below, and it can give an impression. You can just see it slightly with the person on the screen. Just like that, it's looking down, someone looking down. And what you want to do is just make sure it's really nice and even, so that you're staring into your camera. And it's just a subtle thing, but for me, I definitely find it really unsettling when I'm interviewing someone and they're looking down on me. And it's just all of these subtle things just add up. So really just be in charge of that personal brand. So that's the first thing about making a great first impression. Okay, so next we've got, sped ahead. So this is how to listen and build rapport online. And the first thing is clear your space. And again, these things are obvious, and I'm sure you know them. But what happens if our space around us is cluttered, if our phone's right there? We have all these competing elements wanting our attention, and so we're not giving it to the extent that we should on screen. And the big challenge of moving our conversations online is that there's so much out there outside of the screen competing for your attention and for everybody else's attention. So what we've got to do is just, again, set ourselves up for success. Make sure that you are enabling yourself to focus on the people speaking. And it's so, listening is like the most powerful, one of the most powerful tools for communication. It's so important to listen, because if you listen, you make people feel important. If you make people feel important, they are receptive and engaged and open to you, and they trust you and they feel good about you. All of these things, and there's longer exercises we do on this in London Speech Workshop, which are super helpful for listening and the impact of it. So first off, set yourself up for really good listening and put your phone on flight mode, that kind of thing. Next, show them you're listening. So here's a slide, a Zoom meeting, and you can see you've got plenty of really engaged faces that look like they're really listening. And then you've got one on the side who looks like they're not listening, and they're kind of slumped like this, and there's a sort of a not engaged look on their face. And then you've got a few people whose cameras are off. So in this conversation, because all communication is a two-way dynamic, even this now when I can't see any of you, which I'm gutted about because I'd love to see your faces, but even this, I'm really aware that I'm talking to you. I really want you to see my face on screen, and you are going to be receiving. You told me you're around from the poll. Like, the interaction is so important. So listen, if you can turn your video on, do, and then listen with engagement, because you're not invisible in the virtual medium. Your listening matters to the speaker. And not only that, if it's a smaller meeting, if there's 6 of you, your listening sets them up to listen and be engaged with you. So how do we listen? Well, I'm just going to give you a couple of tips on this. Firstly, you need to show it. So that's eyes. So the difference between sort of dull, switched off eyes like this and bright, alert, engaged eyes. Smiling, nodding, and then just a general feeling of being engaged and being present with the screen. Another thing of listening, and I'm going to give you a quick tip on this, there are 3 levels to listening. So we can listen from the ego, which is a fine place to listen to. So it would be if someone says, oh, I was walking down the street the other day and it was ridiculous, but I walked into a lamppost. Listening with the ego would be, oh my God, like that's so weird. I did that 2 weeks ago and I walked into a car, like what's wrong with us? So that's quite good for rapport building and it keeps things light, but it's ego listening, it's my story. Next level down, you have listening with the intellect. So they've said, oh, I've walked into a lamppost, and you would say, well, I'm listening, you're listening for the words that they've said. So, you know, it's so crazy, I've walked into a lamppost. Why is it, you know, what's going on for you? Why is it crazy? And I remember you said a few weeks ago you walked into a lamppost, you know, what's going on? So you're seeing patterns in their speech. And the third level of listening is where you're listening for the subtext. So you're listening for what's going on beneath. Oh, I noticed when you said that, you were smiling, but you seemed underneath, you seemed quite sad, or you seemed kind of overexcited and your breath was really fast. Like, are you okay? So you're listening to the nuance of how they're speaking. Now that level can be really useful in the virtual context because you can look at somebody's body. If you're in a meeting and there is someone who's sitting like that, you can go, okay, what's going on for that person? Maybe they're, you know, feeling a bit meh, or maybe they need a bit of extra support. So that tuning in to level 3 listening can be an absolute gem in terms of really building on making these conversations online flourish. It works in all areas of life, but it's useful online. Okay, this is one of trying not to interrupt. So if someone's speaking, let them speak. So people need to know they're heard. And if sorry, I'm just having a moment where I don't know how we're doing for time, but I'm gonna go a bit quicker because I want to get questions in from you. So if they need interrupting, so if they're speaking and they're going on and on, interrupt with something positive. Positive acknowledgement creates fertile soil. And so you can say, oh, I love that. I love that you're saying that. And then you can carry on, or what a great idea, etc. So interrupting with positivity is a gem. And use their words. So use their words to reflect back. You said X, or just, do you mean blah, blah, whatever they've said. Using some of their words, some of their adjectives is very, very powerful. Right, tips for excellent delivery. So the first tip for you is that when you speak, if you're doing a presentation, let's say, or even if you're speaking up in a meeting, it's your turn to share, be aware of the key ideas you want to get into people's heads. And you're allowed really a maximum of 3, because if you go for 10, you're never going to get people to hold 10 ideas in their heads. People just don't. But people can walk away with 3 ideas and be really struck by them. The more conscious you are on what those ideas are that you want them to have, the more powerful the impact of those ideas, and the more powerfully they'll be sort of implanted into the person's head. So have your 3 key ideas. Jot them down on paper before the meeting. That's really powerful. Next, oh, there we go. Next, add some flavor and spice. So this is when you're on the how you say and what you say. It spices things like personal perspective and your unique idea and a metaphor and a story and something you've noticed. So if it was on the walking into the lamppost story, I could say, oh, last week I walked into a lamppost. I could say, last week I was walking down an insanely busy road and I was just admiring the flow of traffic and how they looked like ants, for example. And in that crazy reverie, I walked into what I thought was a very broad-shouldered person who, you know, was built like a brick or something, but actually it was a lamppost. So that's the kind of thing. So you want to bring in your unique spice, and it just makes it interesting. And that's there available for you for everything. So if you're doing a pitch or a presentation, find your spice to bring in, your unique flavor. Finally, color in your voice. So this is really important, and even more important online when we have so much competing. If you're speaking, there's so much competing for your attention. And so color is a really useful way to bring it to life and grab people's attention. And I'll just give you an example. If I was, it's the difference between going, let's say I'm speaking to someone called Jennifer. If I go Jennifer, or if I go Jennifer, second one, Jennifer is going to turn around. So the brain literally is optimized to hear that color and perk up. It's like a puppy on a leash. We're tugging that leash every time we put color into our words. So make sure that your 3 key ideas have color, and that you're just allowing yourself to put a bit more energy, a bit more color into your speech when you're speaking. That's really going to help your personal brand. So I think that is it from us. Oh, no, there's one more. Sorry, one more, which is consciously deliver your point. So this, there's going to be the final couple of words need to have impact. And so delivering, making sure that they land at their destination, these words, these thoughts, these ideas, that's really powerful. And that's something that definitely need to be doing. Just sending our words out and sort of dropping energy on the final few words of a thought is the opposite of what we need to be doing. So when you're speaking, if you know your 3 key ideas, really think about delivering them to your audience, trying to make eye contact, looking at the people on the screen. Right. Those are your tips for how to get the most out of online conversations. I'm going to stop my screen sharing. You'll have a handout, so if you want to get in touch with us, there's an ebook you can download which has some more great tips in it. If you want to come and book a session with us, you can do that too. But you'll get a handout which gives you all that information. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. So now it means we've got a few minutes open to questions, and I would love to hear this.
Okay, Emma, the questions have been coming in thick and fast. First one, what do you do about the people who are so driven that they won't go off agenda?
Good question. So if they're so driven that they won't go off agenda, well, firstly, I imagine you're talking about the small talk element and sort of making, softening it. So firstly, if you're trying to build rapport with that person and they have a clear objective, then trying to get them off the clear objective is not going to be rapport building. If, let's say it's in the context of a meeting and they're doing it all the time, is the kind of thing that you deal with outside of the meeting. If they're in charge of the meeting and they're running the meeting and this is how they want to run the meeting, then within the meeting, that's how you have to run the meeting. What you can do is soften it by doing the acknowledgement aspect. So being like, oh, I love that point, thank you so much, just to add some edges and sort of warm it up. But really, that might be one where you, if you can, outside of the meeting, say, you could even say this, I just watched this really interesting webinar which made the point that in order to support us in this new online space, it's even more important to just have a moment to build rapport, to bring everyone into the space as the human that they are. So I wonder if we can have like a little top line question where we just check in on how people are. So you could suggest that really nicely without it being accusatory. That helps.
Okay, we've had lots of questions about managing your square. That really has inspired people. So we've had questions about whether any tips about ghosting when you sort of disappear back into your background? Should you indeed change your background because of the message that you're trying to convey? And are backgrounds actually authentic? So what is your advice here about your backgrounds? I know you've given some already, but we've had some sort of questions, further questions there.
Sure. Well, I think if you can do your natural background, then that's going to be more authentic. But you have to be able to make the impression you want to make with your natural background. If you can't, then you're better off doing a fake background and let it be a talking point. With the ghosting, so the disappearing back, that's sort of a technical area that I don't know about. I think it's something to do with distance from your screen, so you need to be fairly close so that it's technical. My feeling is if you can do your own background, that's better because it's a true reflection of you. But sometimes it can't work to be a true reflection of you, in which case by all means use a background and do one that you feel like doing.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. I think that's about being yourself, really, isn't it? You know, being very mindful of how important the background is. We've got a question about encouraging accessibility when colleagues are unwilling or reluctant. I think this links perhaps with another question we've had about those people, neurodivergency, that actually means people are not comfortable with the camera on all of the time, and their idea of active listening might not be the same as a neurotypical. How do you take all those different needs into account?
So that's a great question and really important. I would say that you acknowledge that some people aren't going to be comfortable, and that's okay, because in a conversation we want people to feel comfortable. If they can, it's a lovely thing for the speaker, and it's a supportive part of the two-way communication dynamic to have videos on. But if they don't feel comfortable, then that's going to work against the conversation. But then you try and use the chat function more, or polls or questions to engage. So say, if you don't feel comfortable using your screen, that's okay. I would love you to maybe move towards that. But I would really appreciate you putting comments in the chat box.
Okay, this is a tricky one to answer, Emma, but I'm sure you'll give it a go. Somebody's saying that they try to reflect the words back many times, but they're being told off by their manager, saying, why do you have to repeat everything I say? What should be done in such a scenario?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes. What should be done is that it's one of those, you have to, like, I think I want to say quality, not quantity, but you have to pick the ones that you do. So you can almost go into that third level listening that I mentioned. So which words resonate for them? So if they've said, I really have had enough of staying in, I really want to go to the cinema, you could say, so you really want to go to the cinema, and you really want to get out. You wouldn't repeat their whole sentence verbatim. You could just repeat what you're really hearing. There's a really there, but so you're picking the words that have energy around them. But you don't have to say everything, because that can get people kind of going, why are you copying me?
Okay, and I think a final question. These questions are fantastic. Thank you, everybody who sent them in. And I'm sorry we haven't got time for them all, but how do you deal with people talking over each other or not allowing someone else to speak?
Lovely question. So that's where the interruption technique comes in. So if someone is talking over someone else, or if people are talking over each other, you could just say, hi, everyone. And use people by their names, because that's a trigger. Jane and John, I'm so loving what you're saying. I'm loving the energy. It's just wonderful sitting here listening. But what I find is I can't fully hear either of you. Can we possibly, just because it's online, it's a bit more complex, could we just take it in turns and maybe hand over? Would that be okay? So you could say something like that. Obviously, you need to deal with where you are and the hierarchy, whether it's okay to say that. But some kind of, always lead with a compliment, always lead with a positive. And people are very and receptive when we lead with positives.
Well, thank you, Emma. I'm so sorry that we've run out of time. I think we could actually have a whole webinar on managing your square, because that really has captured everybody's imagination, or many people's imagination. So it just remains to me to thank you again, Emma. That was great, really informative, and to encourage everybody to join us next week when we're going to talk about change when it doesn't go according to plan. So please do your personal brand scorecard, meet the standard, and thank you all very much for joining us today. Thank you again, Emma.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure.